Did you hear about the dentist in Albuquerque that got in loads of trouble because he wasn't even licensed?
What? But how do you sell a dental practice if the dentist was never a dentist?
What the heck is his
I'm not a
name?
dentist, but I did stay in a La Quinta last night.
Huh?
You're not Dr. Stewart.
No, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
Oh, he was a dentist who just let his license lapse or something?
He's the Albuquerque dentist accused of faking records to line his pockets with unneeded procedures. We're talking insurance fraud, tax fraud, shoddy work, and thumbing his nose at both the state dental board and court orders.
Like
He was like, "You only came in for your teeth cleaning, but
I'm gonna
I'm gonna
bill
bill the
for,
insurance that I
yeah,
did a
excellent.
crown and I did fillings and I did all these other things that didn't happen."
So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put, your guys' brains up against ChatGPT because I asked ChatGPT the question, what are five keys that every dentist needs to know before listing their practice? ChatGPT is our guest today. Welcome to the show, ChatGPT. Let's go ahead and pull up your keys that you recommend, and we're just going to go through them one at a time. So the first key is financial records and valuation. Accurate and up-to-date financial records are crucial. Dentists should have comprehensive records of their revenue, expenses, and profitability. It's advisable to work with a professional accountant or valuation expert to determine the fair market value of the practice. How important are those financial records and getting that valuation?
Very important. And I mean, I think that's an obvious statement is, having well documented and accurate financial records is important no matter what. But I think we could go another layer deeper and say where we may have run into a little bit of confusion or just made things a little bit harder than they had to be, where when a practice is selling and its finances are tied up with another location or under, all of the income and expenses are reported under like a combined entity. So they get reported on the same tax return. And then we have to kind of like untangle the spider web of what income belongs to which entity, what expenses belong to which entity, how do you justify that? How is that tracked? Am I just taking your word for it? Employee costs and things like that. I just think it's really important to have very well documented financial records, not just on like a tax return. I don't mean that I don't believe that you're reporting on a legal document your tax return correctly. I just mean that you have your finances separate for the entity being valued.
Are they often tangled up so that you guys have to do a lot of work to untangle them? Do dentists really even pay attention to that stuff?
No, I think most dental offices, most dental practices are working with an accountant or CPA, so their
Hmm.
reported income and expenses are generally pretty organized. I mean, to a degree, it's always going to be up to the accountant, how they want to categorize something. It may not be exactly where we would put it. Again, a pro of Hindley Burgmaier Group is we have a parent company, Burgmaier and Associates.
Mhm.
So a lot of our valuation clients are our accounting clients. And then I get very nice, organized, laid out,
Mm.
accounting records. When someone goes into business, into owning their own practice, they're wrapped up in just getting it started, and nowhere on the radar is how should I set this up to make selling it easier. They're just not worried about untangling the mess, because that could be 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 years down the road. So it's just not a concern. I don't know. I just think me, being involved in the end stages, I think about the end stages, whereas, when they're beginning the life cycle of owning their dental practice, they're not concerned with that at the time. My best guess is that they're going to do a better job managing their business if their finances are easily separated. How would you be able to, high level manage your practice if the document, those financials that what you were looking at represent more than one entity? How can you get a good feel for how any one, say you have multiple locations, is doing if they're all reported under the same entity? So even if they're reported on the same tax return, at least make sure that your financial statements are independent, that the locations are independent, that the salaries are kept independent, not only for valuation purposes, but you're going to have to provide those regular, yearly or interim financial statements to the bank and to a potential buyer.
And you
Okay,
should have separate accounts too. Like you should have separate banking accounts for each location that feeds into those accounting, those categories. I know a lot of dentists, they share employees, and so that's
Right.
why they do the one thing, they put the one cost on their umbrella and say, this is how much we pay employees. If you ever want to sell your dental practice, you want to be able to what that expense would be on the practice that you are wanting to sell. I mean, a buyer's going to want to see that. And so if you have them combined, that there's an issue. There's issues with that.
Yep. And totally the takeaway though is working with the right organizations to get that valuation done and to help you along the way through accounting services to just take all that pressure and stress off of you as the doc.
If you work with an accountant who is versed in your industry, they will know the best practices for accounting your industry. So they will help you be set up for success now and in the future.
All right, ChatGPT says the second key is patient base analysis. Prospective buyers will be interested in the practice's patient demographics, retention rates, and potential for growth. Dentists should compile data on active patients, recurring treatments, and any marketing strategies employed to attract new patients.
I agree.
I agree too.
The patient demographic or patient base analysis, I guess, does influence the evaluation in a few ways. I think it probably equally or maybe even more so affects the work that Kelley does. The prospective buyer is going to be interested in the services that they provide. What percentage of overall revenue does each service type represent? Because we want to make sure that the potential buyers, the people that we're kind of marketing to, can provide the same services. Also, patient demographics can be what insurances or no insurances that the practice accepts. Maybe 50-50 will impact, my part where it's the opinion of value, and then Kelley's part where she's really marketing the practice, vetting, the right new doctor to come take over. The items here are important.
If a pediatric dentist comes on and says, I'm interested in this particular practice because I like it's pretty and everything, and then they look at the patient base and it's all people that are 50 and over, it's going to be really difficult for them to build a pedo practice on that. If they see that there's a high percentage of pediatric patients and there's just a small percentage of people that are adults or older, they can pretty much transition that practice into a pediatric practice fairly easily. Like within the first 24 months, they probably can do that. So it is really important to make sure that that is something that is spelled out very clearly, because buyers do want to look at that. They want to pay attention to that. And also what Rachel said about like recurring revenue, if all of your patients are geriatric patients that are getting, they're all, in their 60s and 70s, where is the long-term revenue or the life of your patients going to go within the next 10 years or so? And I don't know if geriatric is the right word. I'm scared to say any words nowadays.
All right, let's move on to the next question. That was a pretty fast one, so let's see what the next one is. All right, third key is staff and management structure. A smooth transition requires clarity on the roles of responsibilities of the existing staff. Dentists should document job descriptions, employee contracts, and any pertinent HR policies. Additionally, having a clear management structure in place will reassure potential buyers about the practice's operational efficiency.
The reason why I'm on kind of borderline on that is because do you need to figure out what your management structure is if your wife or your husband is the one that's managing everybody? Because guess what? When you sell your practice, they're going to go too. And who's going to do it, when somebody buys it? But, and then also staff, yes, to make sure that, your staff has the experience needed and you believe that they're going to stay for a transition. If you have all new employees, it's going to be a little rocky there if you want to sell. And, or if you have employees that have been there for 20 plus years, that might even be a little rocky. So, I mean, the HR policies can always be updated, when the new doc comes in. So it doesn't necessarily need to be looked at and have to be updated at the time, before you think about selling your practice. I think people should do that, but I think that that's something that's going to be risky? No. Everybody's going to have their own policies and procedures once they buy a practice. So they're going to have to do that anyway. So it doesn't really, I don't think that a dentist really has to spend time or money in that when they are going to sell their practice. But just looking at kind of their staff demographic, I think, and making sure that they're pretty, stable and strong and have a good staff and have people that are knowledgeable in the company that can transition that knowledge to the new dentist. That's important.
I agree. I think that having job descriptions, employee contracts, HR policies, I think all of those are really important to run your business from the get-go. I
Yeah.
think you should strive to have policies and procedures in place throughout your owning your practice, and not oh, I'm going to sell in the next 2 years, I should probably have policies and procedures in place.
Yeah.
To run your practice as efficiently, as possible. Efficiently meaning, that you see more patients and the office runs, like a smooth machine, but also efficiently, and that would allow you to be much more profitable. You should strive to have those things in place throughout your
Yeah.
ownership and not just at the end.
Before you're listing your practice. I mean,
Right.
I've sold practices that don't have that stuff in place, and the new owner comes in and puts that stuff in place. So, I mean, I don't think
Really?
it's crucial to
No,
have, but I think that, like what Rachel said, I think, yes, you should have that as a business owner, period. But I don't think that has to
I don't
happen
think.
for you to think about selling your practice.
And Kelly, obviously, you're going to have more experience in this area than me, but I don't know that that is the key selling point. Like
Mm-mm.
at what
Yeah.
period in the cycle of selling your practice does an interested party find out that you might not have this HR policy in place?
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
None of that happens until
Right.
way later. So
Mm-hmm.
that's not going to be the make or break.
Right. Exactly, Rachel. Yeah.
Obviously, when that sale happens, you don't want the staff to be disintegrating once you come into your new
Yes.
practice.
I think the earlier point of you should strive to have, that healthy workplace environment,
Anyway, yeah.
throughout your ownership experience, I think will help solidify transitioning the goodwill of your staff from under your management to under someone else's management. Because if they already feel like, oh my gosh, every day I show up and I don't know what to expect because we do different things and nobody knows who's in charge, an opportunity to oh, maybe I was waiting for the day that I knew that I should look for a new job, and today is that day because I found out I'm going to have a new owner. You don't want that. You want your staff to, enjoy the place they work so that they want to stay even through a transition.
And if you do have those, policies and procedures in place. Like, let's say you do. I mean, I had a practice that did very much have precise policies and procedures in place. And the new owner, because those policies and procedures actually were based on working with a consultant, and a lot of practices do work with consultants and they pay money every month to do that. And that could possibly be an discretionary expense depending on, the situation. It's highly encouraged for the new owner to then be working with the staff in the same way. So if the new owner is disorganized, then that's going to throw it off too. So it can work the other way too.
I don't think it should be one of the things that
Just start doing.
Here's my to-do list before I sell. Oh, gotta
Yeah.
make sure I get this done.
Yeah.
No, that should be something that you want to get in place way early on.
Yeah.
And that you constantly update it.
Mm-hmm.
ChatGPT, a little basic. Some of these things are a little bit like obvious, but it does sort of open up discussion points that are probably just almost taken for granted. All right, key number 4. Equipment and technology inventory. Buyers will want to assess the condition and value of the practice's equipment and technology. Dentists should compile an inventory list detailing all dental equipment, software systems, and technology assets. Ensuring that equipment is well maintained and up to date can enhance the practice's attractiveness to buyers.
I agree that it's important. This is going to come up during part of the valuation process. Our opinion in finding a range of value, we believe that the lowest number, the lowest value that you would, the low end of the range should represent the value of just your equipment. In the event that you were to have a fire sale, I'm not even considering goodwill. I'm just trying to get every dollar I can out of my equipment. We have you document and an inventory of all of your equipment, all of your tangible assets, and that is the low end of the value range. Buyers will want to accept and to assess the condition and value of the practice's equipment. Yes, they will do that. That doesn't necessarily significantly impact the value of your business, though.
What does?
Well, I mean, it may impact the marketability, as in your practice may not be as appealing. If we go back to an example of, do you want a move-in ready turnkey, it's already furnished home, or do you want, are you interested in a fixer-upper? Not everyone is going to be interested in a fixer-upper. Not everyone can afford move-in ready. So, if you have older equipment or equipment that has not been well maintained, it may not necessarily significantly negatively, how many iflies can I put in there, impact the value of your practice, but it may make your practice less desirable to the majority. Just as if you have a ton of equipment in your practice and you have every new laser and all the different imaging equipment and all that doesn't necessarily improve the value of your practice either, because we're not piecing and parting out your equipment to come up with a practice value.
Yeah. So Rachel, on that, what you're talking about on that, in a description of like how I've dealt with buyers in the past when there has been equipment in the practice that not necessarily the buyer has worked with before. So there's been a few times that the practice will have equipment that needs certain certifications that a buyer has to pay money to get certified to use that equipment, or they need training from the seller to use that equipment. And so there is an investment in the buyer to even if the equipment's completely paid off, it's an investment for them to be able to use it. So it's not really valuable to them unless they know how to use it.
You could have the most state-of-the-art equipment, but your practice isn't profitable, or it's not very profitable, it's trending downwards. versus you could have a practice with dated machinery, but you are crushing it. You're making really good, progress that's trending upwards year over year. It to me almost always just boils down to like, before you sell your practice, are you trending upwards or are you trending downwards? That's something to notice. And if you're trending downwards, do we have time to turn it around? If you're trending upwards, like, okay, it's probably time to start our exit strategy. Like, we need to get this going.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Kelly would agree that some of our most profitable practices that we've seen have been a small and pretty outdated office. The guy, the doc, that's in there can just crank out those bread and butter services and very low overhead, and they are just the perfect setup. They may not have the fanciest equipment, they may not have the newest this or that. Their office terribly needs to be updated. You're not going to go in and feel like you're in the spa necessarily, but they can get the job done.
I think an older dentist that has been doing this for a really long time looks at their equipment and says if it's working.
If it ain't broke, don't
Yeah.
fix it. They're like,
And
I'm
younger
a pro at using this. Why would I want to learn something
younger
new?
dentists, they want state-of-the-art stuff. I know so many younger dentists and dentists that have come from corporate, and they just want like new stuff. They want like a beautiful practice. I mean, there are some that only really look at the numbers and they're like, "Ugh, this is profitable. I want this." And they're really thinking, so like trying to get their mindset to switch from having such a gorgeous practice to maybe think about where you want to live. Like, this is going to finance your home and, your family and your kids to go to private school and that kind of stuff. But majority of them want a pretty practice, something that looks good, it's big, and they can move around fairly easily. They can have patients in different operatories at once. That's kind of what they want.
And also, if the practice is profitable, like more so than just state of the art, then obviously you could, invest some of those profits into newer equipment. Versus if you've got state of the art equipment, but nobody's coming, or
Yeah.
it's like, what's good is that? I'd rather have the practice that gives me more return, and then decide how I want to upgrade the equipment from there. Cool, let's move on to the last key. I probably should have done more. You're ripping through these pretty fast, but 5, legal and regulatory compliance. Compliance with industry regulations and legal requirements is essential for a smooth transition. Dentists should ensure that licenses, permits, and certifications are up to date. They should also address any outstanding legal issues, contracts, or liabilities that could impact the sale process.
Gardner has refused to plead guilty to tax fraud and now to practicing dentistry without a license. He entered a plea of what's called no contest to both those things. But in the eyes of the law, it's the same thing as guilty. And that guilty mark will keep him from getting a New Mexico dental license. And we checked around today. We really don't know of any other state that would give him a license with a felony, let alone 4, on his record.
This guy called us and wanted us to do a valuation on his practice.
What are you selling? Like, he's trying to make money to pay back all of the insurance that he stole.
And he
What are you
wanted,
selling?
he didn't want to pay for the valuation. He wanted it included in the practice sale.
No.
And I asked Eric and Cheryl if we should do it.
And what did they
I'm
say?
like, well, the goodwill there's no goodwill.
Yeah.
But did you know that this guy was shady at the time or no?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was freaked out that I got to talk to him. I'm wondering if he called any other broker, but I did have a conversation with him. We did have an email conversation going back and forth about pricing, and I did talk to him about he really doesn't have goodwill. Like, how is he going to sell his practice? The only thing that he could probably sell is his equipment.
Yeah, I wonder if he would even be allowed to sell his practice when it was built on fraud. I mean, all of his patients deserve their money back. I mean, I understand they received a service, but it was fraudulent service.
Yeah, but it's more like he defrauded the insurance companies.
Yeah, but they still paid for insurance and they didn't
Right.
receive care from a
So he's
licensed
probably
professional.
going to have to make restitution to the insurance companies.
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm saying. He's selling his practice to try to pay back all of the stolen insurance money.
But not only that, but Josh and I looked up all his like Google reviews, and there's like a bunch of
Were they
people.
good?
No, there was a bunch of them that were
No,
good.
most of them were like 5 stars. And there was like probably 100, like 100.
He's
I
probably
think
like,
if
I
I'm-
tell you what, I won't charge you a copay or anything. We're gonna go straight to the insurance. I'm gonna help you get maximum dollars out of your insurance policy. Oh my gosh.
outliers aside, or the odd person aside who has a felony record or whatever. But this particular key, I want to break it down a little bit. So what are, it's talking about dentists should ensure that licenses, I mean, that one is a given. Do you have a license to practice dentistry in New Mexico? Permits and certifications, I'm not sure I understand what those are all about. Would that be a permit as far as, is it the same thing, just to practice
Well, like
dentistry?
your business permit, you probably have to have that. Certifications
Continuing
are
education.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
certifications are probably like your educational, your CE courses that you have to take for the equipment to make sure you can operate the equipment, you can do the procedures or the extra procedures. I mean, we have dentists nowadays that do a lot of cosmetic procedures. Those dentists may be licensed. They may have, their dental license. They may have a lot of, credentials, things like that, but they do need to be certified to perform cosmetic procedures. And there's certain type of equipment that has to that they have to learn and they have to know to perform on their patients. One of the biggest things is Botox. And so they have to have certain types of educational or CE that are associated with that kind of stuff. They can't just start, shooting you up with Botox without being
Right.
certified.
And I think, making sure that all of these things are up to date is important because you really don't know how long the sale process will take.
Right.
Once you decide that you're ready to sell, it could happen in 3 months, it could happen in 3 years, it could, you just don't know. So you need
Right.
to stay on top of your stuff because you can't just assume that, if I list today, I'll be out in 6 months. So I'm not gonna worry about my continuing education. I'm not gonna worry about this or that. Like you need to maintain everything until your last day.
Where would continuing education, for example, fall into the income statements? Where would that fit?
It depends. A lot of times we'll say for the actual dentist, their continuing education is a discretionary expense because it's their responsibility. However, if they're covering as a benefit the continuing education expenses for any of their staff, say they have an associate, they have hygienists, they have anyone else that requires continuing education, if they cover that expense as a benefit, then it's included in employee costs. And we suggest that any new buyer continue to cover those same benefits.
The dentist should also address any outstanding legal issues, contracts, or liabilities that could impact the sale process. So what are some liabilities that the seller would face? Would that be more tangible or intangible?
It could be a tangible thing. I mean, they could owe money on their equipment. They have loans for their equipment. They have practice loan debt, long-term liabilities. Those have to be considered. And like when we talked today, Josh, about like if you own a practice and you basically are making a certain amount of money and you have a lot of debt and you go in and you say, I need a practice valuation. You get the practice valuation and its value is less than your debt. You're not going to want to sell the practice. because you're like, I'm going to go in this owing money still.
Mhm.
Let's just say we say your practice value is 500, you have $600,000 in debt. You're like, I want to sell it for either 600 or more. You have a buyer that comes in and sees that we're listing it at 600 or more, does their own due diligence, comes back and says it's only worth 5. You just wasted all that time because you're not going to want to accept 5 and the buyer's not going to want to accept 6 or more. I mean, I'm not saying that that's never going to happen. Like sometimes a buyer will come in if they really want the location, they're motivated by the practice itself, like it's been around for such a long time, the name stands out to them. They want all of that has been existing, and they're willing to pay more for that. That there is times that does happen. More times that doesn't. Though they'll come in and they see that it's not worth that and they want to offer less. That is important. That is really important, that they make sure that when they get the valuation and they see what they owe, is that reasonable for them? Is that something that they can accept? Eric always tries to advise clients that having a practice or having a dental practice shouldn't be your only thing that you're counting on for retirement. There's a lot of other things that you should be doing.
We valued a dental practice a couple of years ago where, and part of our process of getting to know the client, we ask questions like that. Do you have any outstanding legal issues? The dentist wrote like a really lengthy and thorough explanation where she had a client basically turn her into the board over a patient care issue, something that she experienced in her treatment. And the dentist, unfortunately, they had a negative mark on their record, but they resolved the issue, everything was cleared with the board and all that. And I think it's really important that if you do have any outstanding issues, you get that corrected, because another part of your goodwill that you're selling is your reputation, your practice's reputation. And if you don't protect that, then you're going to lose a good portion of your value. Your patient experience is so important, and if you have those negative experiences out there, plus possible legal issues, and being turned into the board over certain things, like that is not going to help you. So you need to make sure that you get any issues like that resolved, not only before you sell, but as soon as possible.
100%. So, all right, well, that's kind of the list. This was fun. It was good for us to sort of bring in the human element, to just sort of do a little bit of fact checking and elaborate on ChatGPT's assessment. I'm going to just read the last little bit here because I think there's actually some value here. By addressing these key areas, dentists can effectively prepare their practice for sale and increase its appeal to potential buyers. It's also advisable to seek guidance from experienced professionals such as dental practice brokers or consultants to navigate the complexities of the sale process. That is what Hindley Burgmaier Group basically does. We are experienced professionals. We work primarily as dental practice brokers. We are basically consultants here to help our docs navigate the complex sea of selling.
And I think if you boil down the points we made today, really it's don't wait until the last minute to address, these 5 key things. You should really be focusing on these things all throughout, your ownership, and then especially at the end.